Now here to discuss the future of identity, please welcome moderator Rob Forbes and panelists from Okta, Saviynt, and CyberArk.
Good morning, everyone. Great segue for us. A lot of touch points that touched on identity. I'm Rob Forbes, Field CISO for Stratascale. Jordan dated himself a little bit talking about his background earlier. I predate him even earlier. I got out of the military in 1990, worked at Headquarters Air Force on fun things like the Worldwide Military Command and Control System, Multic systems that were the first ring-gated security platforms, and this fun thing called Milnet that I got to spend a lot of time working on there. So I came out and immediately started doing those types of things in public sector organizations and stuff. So that's a little my background. We talked about the titans of the industry yesterday with Dave. We have the titans of identity here with us with the folks from Saviynt, Okta, and CyberArk, so I'll let them introduce themselves.
Maybe we'll go this direction.
That works.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Traffanstedt. I'm one of the field CTOs at CyberArk. Have been with CyberArk for 10 years now, but have been in the broader, I'll call it, machine identity space for going on 2 decades. Starting as a developer, don't throw anything at me. Eventually, I moved into identity and security after that, but then going into data encryption, and now, of course, hanging out in identity. So very happy to be here. Thank you for the invite.
My name is David Fesperman. I'm on Okta's global field CTO team. Been at Okta for about 3 years now. Before that, I spent about 8 years in end-user computing, but specifically focused on the security side of that and how users were accessing things. So same general field, a little bit different application.
Awesome. I'm David Lee, field CTO at Saviynt. I've only been at Saviynt now, I think this is like month 4 or 5, but I've been in identity for over 20 years at AWS, at SailPoint, where the last time I was there, Brandon and I were on a panel, and we got in trouble. So we'll see if we can do that again today. But I've spent most of my time in identity. I've been a practitioner, I've been a product leader, so I've been kind of all around it. So it's going to be a very interesting discussion today, because I've already seen how there's a lot of talk about cybersecurity, and we keep talking about these things, but nobody's really mentioning identity. That's not sitting well with me today. So we're going to fix that. Well, we're going to fix that.
We'll fix that. You know, we heard yesterday, we've heard other conversations, it's going around now that people no longer use exploits, they no longer hack in, they log in. So identity is becoming very critical in the infrastructure. It's the access point for everything. You start talking about zero trust or other things. Identity is, you know, key to everything we're going to do. We talk about continuous authentication and authorization. You're talking identity, you're talking identity, you're talking identity. It doesn't matter where you're at inside cybersecurity. There's identity touching something, and it touches something not just in cybersecurity, but in the business process. So it's critical inside the infrastructure and the organization. So we want to touch on some topics about that, walk through a few of those. So we'll start off at the first, and we'll have a conversation. We've got some friends at a company called Venafi who've put out some interesting stats. They're not the only one, but I've known those guys for years. We talk about human identities quite a bit, but we forget about machine identities. Machine identities, according to Venafi and other folks, 40 to 45 to 1, going to shift to 100 to 1. We've done a lot of work over the years on managing our human identities, but we've not done a whole lot on those machine identities, what we call carbon, non-carbon. So how do we go deal with that? So Brandon, you know, we'll pass this over to you, given your background and your ties to Venafi and the machine identity space. Can you kind of walk us through what's going on there, what the challenge is, what the future is there?
Yeah, for sure, would love to. And yeah, I love the Venafi folks. It was super cool to have them come together with CyberArk last year. But I mean, David, I think we're kind of being scandalous starting with machine identities versus human identities. But
sorry.
Thing is, we are in a state of the rise of the machines. To your point, we see for every one powerful human identity, us, yay, there are around 82 powerful machine identities. And I'll give you kind of a couple thoughts there. The first is, some of you may know this realm as non-human identity. You hear some people call it that, you hear other people call it machine identity. I'll give you my take on it. Machine identity, I think, is the way to go. The reason is, non-human has 2 connotations. The first is that it covers things like farm animals, as an example, that are tagged. And we tend to want to focus on not farm animals with this particular realm of identity security. But the other more important area is it creates a psychological break in our minds between human and non-human. It is either us or not us. And I'll submit to all of you, that has created a state where we tend to focus on human identity first, save the machines for later, but with volume and variety, those machine identities are becoming far more tasty from a threat actor perspective. So long story short, we see machines typically placed in the second degree because they're different, but also because it's hard, right? When we look at the machine identity sort of area, we think that we need to do good things, like have machines perform strong authentication. You heard about the move to passwordless and biometric authentication. But the thing is, that script running on that middleware server from 20 years ago doesn't know how to handle a push authentication, much less have things like OAuth. So one of the areas that what made me fall in love with this space in particular was that we can take a machine identity and do things like ask it for strong authentication. Now, it could be things like a signature of the application, where it's running from, who it's running as, maybe a certificate, but it needs to be a combination. You can do things like establish strong authentication for machines. You just have to think about it a different way. The other realm is the area of what I'll call expectation of constraint. A human identity can yell when it hurts, when you've not given it enough rights to do something. A machine identity, up until the advent of agentic AI, fails closed, broken. So by nature, you want to overprivilege it, right? Give your vulnerability scanner identities domain admin level permissions to do authenticated scans, or make sure that your cloud scanning stuff has the equivalent of global admin or even classic admin in some cases, super admin, project owner, etc. So making sure that we're balancing this expectation of constraint from machines and anticipating least privilege early. There are a lot of tools out there that do it. I'll end with this. I talked a little bit about the volume of machine identities, some of the differences. There are technologies out there, open and closed source, that can help you strongly authenticate them, help you do things like move your machines from standing access to just-in-time access through things like short-lived certificates. But the big deal here is choosing what to target. You likely have, for your service accounts, some sort of application tiering of risk. Keep following that. If you don't have it, build it. You've heard about frameworks today that can help, and you'll hear about more. But the other area that I would implore you to do is don't get stuck on the legacy service accounts while your DevOps teams are building out more microservices, right? Target new build as well, highly visible stuff that lets you take advantage of new tech while still building up kind of the legacy things. A lot of folks will sort of operate these in serial, but fact is, this area, the dynamic machine area, is where we're seeing far more risk, far more velocity, and far more volume. So find the teams that are building new, find the technologies that fit in this realm, and then make sure we're also not forgetting about kind of the legacy stuff. But try and do them in parallel, not in serial. But just a few thoughts on the machine front. I could talk about it for an hour, but I'll stop now.
Well, I think we're all known that we can talk for a long time, and I think that's great advice. Don't get caught in the swamp, in that muck, trying to pull your feet out on all the legacy stuff while you've got something else exploding over here.
The swamp continues to fill.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I appreciate that a lot. Let's move on to the second topic here. You know, identities now are kind of the control plane. Identities, new perimeter's been around for a while. It's, again, you don't log in, you don't hack in, you log in. How do I access something? Zero trust is about continuous authentication and authorization as the identity. I kind of look at a new emerging technology that's getting a lot of more acronyms, ISPM, Identity Security Posture Management. I kind of look at that as like an air traffic controller for identities now, as all these identities are coming in and trying to touch on things. And a lot of organizations, it's a new concept to them as, oh, wait a minute, I got a new thing. What is this? I'm still trying to get around IGA. What's ISPM? So I was wondering, David, if you could kind of take us a little through on ISPM and how its approach is being adapted to the identity industry, kind of some of what it's going to bring to us as we start to try and wrangle these identities in.
Sure, and you know, I think you touched on it, that there's all these acronyms out there, and security posture management seems to be one of the hottest things people are talking about right now. There's tons of different ones, and it's hard to break down what the differences are, so I'll try to do it as succinctly as possible. An identity security posture management tool, you know, we talked about it earlier. We heard one of the previous panelists talk about the zero trust model. You've got the 5 different pillars, and identity being that first pillar. And when you take an identity lens to security, when you're focused on the identity and the context of that identity, of the individual doing the authentication or the machine identity.
Thank you.
We're very focused on what is out there, what do they have access to, what privileges do they have, are they actually using them? It's a little bit of a gray area in governance, but not quite as much, just focus more on the security element, but it really gives us an interesting viewpoint into what is actually going on within our environments today. Because we all know that identity it's tough to get it right because there's so much out there and there's so many moving parts and it's constantly in flux. We've got new systems onboarding, we've got new employees coming and leaving the organization, and oftentimes these identities are just left hanging out there. The permissions get stale, the access is forgotten about. I talked to a customer yesterday. We did an evaluation of their environment. We found that they had 25 different global admins on their Google Workspace tenant, and about 8 of which they had no idea had that level of access. They said, these guys don't need it. There's no reason for this. We found an individual who's a board member that they'd spun up an account for 8 years ago. Never logged in. No multi-factor auth either. Perfect social engineering attack right there. So having a system, an ISPM, that's going to go in and catalog, inventory, and give you an understanding of what's going on within your environment from that identity layer, then allows us to understand the risk profile. You know, if this were to be compromised, if we assume compromise, what could occur? And then we can take more of a proactive approach to how we start addressing these items and make sure that we're shoring up our infrastructure, we're shoring up our access policies. And that lens is very unique because we oftentimes find gaps in our security controls. Same customer from yesterday, those 25 global admins, fun story in Google Workspace, even though you have it federated with an IDP like Okta, you cannot block those global admins from logging in locally. They didn't realize that. They didn't have multi-factor auth enabled on a single one. That was fixed right away. They paused the call, they went and put tickets in, they got that address right away. But I see this daily with customers because identity, it's hard to get right, it's easy to get wrong, and it only takes one missed credential for a threat actor to get it. We heard that earlier. Just one thing that we miss, and that's where we're very susceptible. So.
Yeah, and just add a little piece of that too, right? Part of it is also not technology, but just culture-wise, right? The speaker in the beginning talked about that a lot, right? When you're looking at your organization in general, it's about the culture of security and what you're doing. And with Identity Security Posture Management, what we're seeing is that identity is starting to speak the language a little bit more like their security brothers or sisters, right? And start to look at these things and understand it a little more. Also giving you the toolage and visibility to be able to have that conversation. Because just in the examples that, I think it was Jordan, right, that was walking through this morning, it was a service account. And then they were able to hash a password and that's how they got through, right? So then if you go in to do an investigation on that, okay, well, what's this service account? Where did it get created? What's its life? All these questions are gonna get asked, and that's the identity team. And typically, identity team right now is still considered like infrastructure, and they don't understand those knowledge. When security comes asking all these things, they're like, what? Threat? What are you I provisioned it on this day, and George left 5 years ago, and they told us never to turn it off. So that's what we did, right? Now you can start to move and to have these conversations when you're looking at the threats and understanding the identities and risk and where this access kind of leads to. It gives you that full picture from both sides. So security loves to block from the front door. We're gonna take an endpoint, we're gonna protect it, nobody's gonna get in. We love that, right? But people still get in, and what happens is we don't have a visibility organization-wise. Once they get in, what's all this stuff behind it? And so what we're seeing is Identity Security Posture Management sets identity teams to be able to have those conversations and go, hey, once they get through that door, here's all the things they can get to. And so here's probably the most important things we should take care of, because we've got a bunch of accounts with high privilege access to this resource, which is behind this endpoint. And right now we don't have a lot of that visibility, or we find it later after the investigation, or we just never find it, right? Security teams go off and do what they do, and identity teams keep filling out tickets, which is what we have to change.
Yeah. In many cases, your builders don't think like this. Like, they don't think about implementing identity or security controls into what they're putting together. Like, if you need a bag and you're at the grocery store and there's a bag behind the counter, you might think, oh, I should ask someone. Your builders think, oh, bag, boom, done, like solved. Like, the rules just aren't top of mind for them because they're focused on other things. So, sorry.
No, I was actually going to ask you to add a little color. The other thing that I think about in there, and we're seeing similar things with this, is like with agentic AI, you give it a task, it's going to go do its task. and it might actually adapt itself to grant itself access to grab that bag. I need a bag. So it's not just your developers, but as these agentic AIs spin up and they're spinning up privilege and access and those types of things, they're just going to go, I need that, because they've been given a task. If you don't have your guardrails in properly and you don't have something like ISPM in place to actually monitor what it's doing, hey, I'm going to spin up an account that's got global admin access to give me access to that bag that I need to get to because you told me to go solve this problem. So it's going to get very interesting as we get in there. And again, I love a good analogy. My thought is ISPM's kind of our air traffic controllers for identities. It's watching all the incoming flights. It's watching where they're landing. It's watching where they're going. Are they taxiing up to here? Those types of things. All right, let's step on to the next topic. We're at an AI summit. We can't talk about identity without talking about AI. Right. I mentioned agentic AI. It's going to be spinning up a lot of IDs. They're up, they're down, they're ephemeral. AI as an enabler inside of identity. How do we use this as a tool for identity? It's been a problem in identity. How do we do these processes and these tasks? So, David, I was wondering if you could kind of walk us through how AI is changing identity from a growth and expansion, but also from an enabler inside the organization.
Yeah, so what we're seeing is I would say the second wave of this. So about 10 years ago, we saw this, and it was more machine learning than a lot of identity products, where we're looking to say, here's all this data that we know we're not going to go clean up, right? Because nobody's signing up to go fix the AD permission problem, right? Anybody? Yeah, nobody's signing up to go do that. So we just said, look, we're going to build on top of all this data, and so we tried it then to, whether it's role design or peer group analytics, or trying to look at certain access and understand blast path radius. Now with LLMs and it getting easier to go and deploy this, what we're seeing is some of these things are easier to do. So like entitlement descriptions, because we all know that we name all of our entitlements and our groups and permissions, we give them very clear names that people can understand what they mean.
Every time.
So when we do things like certifications and managers get it, they go, oh yeah, group 752 Linux box. Oh, I know, yeah, they need that. We don't do that, but nobody's gonna go do the process to go clean it up. So what we're seeing is areas like that where we can take advantage of AI and LLMs to go and understand language patterns and be able to understand access patterns and go, hey, this is what these entitlements are, helping to do better role analysis. We're going to see those things. Also, we're starting to see a lot around using agentic app onboarding, because we still all have those 200 CSV files that we're still integrating with when we go to provision access, right? So being able to get those disconnected apps and understand and pull that in. So it's going to allow a lot of the administrative tasks that have kind of been dug with identity, that we have been, a lot of identity programs get stuck in the mud in, just these basic blocking and tackling of, oh, we got to go this and onboard another application, now we got to do this. A lot of these things are going to be made easier, so we can start to have the conversation of, now that we have this, let's start having more ISPM conversations. Let's start having security conversations about how we're managing this. Let's start looking ahead and going, if we're going to roll out this new policy, if we want to change these roles, what is the effect it's going to have? And right now, a lot of identity programs are just stuck in the fact of, they've just got so many things to do. So we're seeing a lot of that deployed on the tools on that side to help with that administrative task. But the thing that's interesting to me, because I'm a researcher, computer scientist, I love all this stuff, is when you start to look at the deployment of AI within enterprises, right? And what that means.
Absolutely.
And so whether it shows up as a machine identity or however you want to classify it, and the fact if you think that it's not in your environment, people, this is the same thing that we saw with SaaS. I remember CISO said, no, nobody's using SaaS in our organization. Yeah, you are. And everybody's using AI in your organization, which they should, but the sprawl at which this is going is just astronomical. So the ability to go and look at that and start to ask the questions, what does that mean when, I'll tell you, I like using the example of typical LLMs, you're asking it questions, you want to connect it to data, it's great at that. So I deploy AI internally and go, okay, now I want to connect it to the sales data, the HR data, this data, so now any of my employees can ask questions, they get reference data, this is awesome. It's awesome until you then ask the question, we kind of live in a segmented world generally in enterprises, right? HR has access to certain information, employees have access to certain information, but we kind of segment it based off of, well, this person in HR only gets access. It's not generally available to everybody in the application. Well, the way an LLM typically works is it wants as much data as possible to put that together. So now you have this kind of proxy of, if I ask this question and it looks at all of this data, who's asking a question, what data does the AI have access to, and what data does the proxy person have access to? And when I combine two pieces of data, what does that mean? And if your head's kind of scratching and getting ready to explode, yeah, exactly, right? Because we're back to some of the same principles of all this is resting on data, and data is something we have ignored for 40 years. We just said it's whatever, it's there. And so now we're going to start having these questions of how does that work when we start to deploy some of these AI models? We got to get back to our data classification. All these fun and hard things that we said we'll put into the side, kind of like what we did with machine identities. We'll get to that later. We're going to have to come back and start handling these things.
Yeah, I've always said we kind of started wrong. We started at the gate, the outside, the moat and castle, versus what we were trying to protect. If you talk zero trust, you talk the protect surface. What's the protect surface really? It's your data. It's the application that's accessing the data. It's the API that's accessing. What's my protect surface? It's that. How do I get to that data and that information? And we've done it backwards. We're starting to get it right with zero trust. Identities are the gateway into there. Guys, I appreciate the conversation. We've got a couple minutes left, so I want to give the audience a chance to ask a question or two if they want. So we'll let and again, just like Steven said, the lights are bright, so I can't tell if we got a question.
Wave or throw something at us? Because all we see is lights. Okay.
We won't see the thing you throw coming at us.
Right, so that's an even better. You get to see our response when it hits us in the head.
You saw how excited the people in the front got. Like,
They
this
got
is
really
their
excited.
time. Like, everywhere else is like, I'm in the front. But I think we have a question over here. Yeah?
You do. Quick question.
Okay,
here.
go.
So in some ways, I feel like the industry is its own worst enemy because we are allowing fundamentally unsafe designs to be deployed across the board. In the automobile industry, they had to eventually sell cars with seat belts and airbags mandatory. What are we doing on our side to kind of improve just general security across the board in design patterns? Maybe efforts to eliminate the SSO tax, for example, that encourages smaller companies maybe to not implement security and identity as they should.
So maybe I'll start with one thing, and it won't directly answer the question. So I'll invite David and David to add on. But one of the things I see time and time again is that security and identity does not eat their own dog food / drink their own champagne, whatever it is. Like, we'll see cases where we are building this very strong authentication workflow for downstream users like developers or other members of the IT team, and yet our security team will have single factor. That's crazy. Like, whether we're talking about humans or machines downstream, security and identity teams can get a ton of positive movement by saying, by the way, this SSO path that we went down, we did it ourselves first. We would never ask you to do, and maybe you're telling the truth or a little bit of the truth, we would never ask you to do something that we ourselves would not do. I can't tell you how much positive movement I see with that. So number one, just practicing what we preach as security and identity practitioners is a huge uplift in that realm.
Yeah, I also see, as we look at platforms like you gentlemen represent, opening the APIs up, building the integrations, making it readily accessible, addressing things like continuous authentication and authorizations. We want to move to zero trust. The platforms all seem to be moving that way. There seems to be more synergy between the industry to make sure that we've got best of integration versus best of breed.
Yeah. So two things real quick, and they're both like really long things, so I'm going to give you summaries of it. Number one, standards. So I can at least say an identity standard. We are working on more standards to kind of help with that. IPSI is one standard that's coming across right now that Okta's a part of. Aaron Pilecki, did I get that right? Yeah. Aaron Pilecki is leading that chair. The other side of it though is too, we have to kind of readdress this shared responsibility model. Find me offline if you want to hear my rants about that. But like the bottom line is, from a vendor perspective and from a partner perspective, there's something that asks for us to be more prescriptive, but at the same time, as a customer, you have to be willing to accept that prescription. And what we end up getting a lot, and what vendors will go back to, is that the customer goes, well, no, my operation works like this, and we're special snowflakes, and we got to do this. So then the vendor shifts and goes, well, fine, we won't give you prescriptive, we'll give you more open, so you can build whatever you want. So there's a meeting of the minds that we have to do. We have to kind of rethink that there's got to be a willingness on the buyer side to go, we're willing to change a little bit, and there's got to be a willingness on the vendor side to get a little bit more perspective, and standards help with that.
Yeah.
And if you are open to that, just tell us.
Yeah.
During the
Guys, I'm gonna wrap us up. Actually, you can grab any of us. We'll be floating around. They'll be out at the partner booths. But guys, I greatly appreciate it. Everybody, appreciate the time. Appreciate the good conversation.
Thank you,
guys.
Rob.